You're listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. With the help of successful individuals across industries, Dirk breaks down the unknown parts of every vocation while highlighting the importance of finding a career where you can leverage your natural skills, passions, and interests. Now here's your host, Dirk Nevelle.
Hi, everybody. This is Dirk Nevelle. Welcome to my podcast. On with me today is Jolina King. Thanks, Jolina, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So Jolina is coming to us from Colorado. And just a little bit about Jolina. I met Jolina a few years ago. She's been with a friend of mine who's in the industry that I'm in, one of my favorite people, Doug. And they've been together for, I think, 25 years, if I'm right. 22.
3 months and 12 days, but who's counting?
There you go. That's, I think, close to how long Michelle and I have been married. We got married in 2000, but it's about 20. Yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed getting to, we have these little events where we go away and a lot of times our partners and spouses come with. And Jolina was one of those I really liked when I first met her. And she's very, very deep and very intelligent. And, she's a healer and a teacher. And there's a lot more behind that. And I'm going to let her, in her own words, break that down. But I'm excited to have her on because I think she's going to provide a lot of really good advice and just kind of give people a different lens about living their life and choosing a career. So Jolina, why don't you give us just kind of a version of what it is you do, and we'll just kind of take it from there and go backwards a little bit. But if you met somebody for the first time and they ask you what it is you do, how would you respond?
Oh, this is always an interesting question for me. So let me start with most of the people who show up in my office are asking questions about relationships or about health issues. They're people who recognize from a health perspective that their mind has a role to play in what's going on in their body. And when they're asking about relationships, they generally have a sense that in a relationship, the other person is not just the problem, that they are, wherever they go there, they are also contributing to the problem. So they're generally people interested in personal development and self-actualization. So as a healer, my job is to work in the realm of the mind. And what we are looking to heal or make whole is the story that a person is telling themselves about themselves and about the experiences in their lives. And then as a teacher, what I find so inspiring is to be able to teach a framework that allows people to take themselves on their own healing journeys so that they're not dependent on coming back to me. Might not be the best business model, but it's what inspires me.
I get it. So would you say, I'm just curious, when you work with somebody, is it maybe a 6-month relationship, a 12-month relationship?
It depends on the issue. I've had clients that have worked with me for years, and they sort of pop in and out depending on what's going on with them. I generally, a few months at a time is usually what people do with me. They get enough information, they get over whatever hurdle is stopping them at the time, and then show up again when the next hurdle arrives, is usually what happens. But I've also run groups, women's groups, and that have gone on for years at a time, as we go deeper and deeper into really unpeeling the layers of the onion, becoming clearer and clearer on who we are, what our dominant values are at any given time, what the conflicts in our lives are showing us about us, and what all of those conflicts and challenges are illuminating about where our soul is calling us to go next.
So do you work with men as well?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. A lot of my female clients want to be in the women's groups. They love working together.
Yeah.
And I have no problem bringing people into women's groups. It's not so easy to bring people into co-ed groups. Typically, if I do a group for everybody, it's women that show up in greater numbers than men. But with my individual clients, my one-on-one clients, most of them are men.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. Sometimes in these podcasts, like I kind of have an idea where I want to go, but a random question will pop in my head and I just ask it because it's natural. Like my experience, like working with Joe Dispenza and even going to University of Santa Monica, which was a spiritual psychology curriculum, the majority of the people there were women and versus men. And I guess just a real basic question is, why do you think that is?
It's a great question. I don't really know why it is. I mean, what pops to mind is in our culture, we live in a very patriarchal culture. And I mean, think about where men typically will show up. What kind of conference are the men going to show up? And I know this is stereotypical, but typically business development, sales conferences, anything about making money or doing well in vocation is typically going to be more male oriented or male dominated. And then you look at Joe Dispenza and work like that. That's very much about spiritual development. It's about healing. It's about introspection and that sort of more touchy-feely, softer science, if you like, which traditionally has spoken more to the female or to femininity, right? So I think part of it is a function of this patriarchal culture in which we live. Beyond that, maybe women prefer to do things more in group. I mean, think about when you go to the movies, like, I certainly remember as a teenager being in the movies and somebody had to go to the bathroom, and it was never just one girl getting up to go to the bathroom. It would be two or three going off together. Whereas I don't think men get up and go to the bathroom together. I think men are quite competent and confident to do things on their own.
Yeah, it's
I
interesting.
don't know, maybe there's something of that.
No, it is interesting. I also think about like what you're talking about, how it influences careers and what, say, men get into. And I don't want to, the language, I've worked on my language over the years and I try to use I language, but sometimes I mess up. But I think many men are chasing money, what looks good, you use patriarch, but I think there's something there that's, it blends in with what this podcast is about in terms of choosing life work, like that's in alignment with who you are. And, we talked a long time before I hit record and just about feeling safe to like pursue something that might feel contradictory to, say, a belief system you held that maybe your dad helped develop, about money or whatever. So I think it's an interesting parallel.
Can I say one more thing that
you
just
can
popped
say
into my head? You
anything you want.
Thank you. You used the word safety and vulnerability was a concept that shot into my head right away. I was once asked to facilitate a retreat for a group of CEOs that were all part of a mastermind group. And they hired me and flew me down to Florida, supposedly to work with them for an afternoon of their multi-day retreat. And they ended up keeping me there for 2.5 days. The reason that they brought me in was because they were part of a mastermind group in which they were in non-competing industries. And so the idea of this group was that they should then be able to open up and talk with each other and share ideas about where they were struggling in business, and then pick each other's brains on how to overcome their problems. The challenge was that they couldn't open up and get vulnerable with each other. There was too much fear of showing any sort of weakness, I guess, in their business or in themselves. So they hired me to come and help them figure out how to be more vulnerable, be more comfortable being vulnerable, so that they could actually help each other in this mastermind group. Now, women, I don't think, have as much fear of being vulnerable in that way, of speaking about the things that are challenging to them and opening up in front of a group. That's been my experience anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. I got a lot of I was in a fraternity, and I was, I was a smart ass, and but I was always the sensitive guy. And I always, and as I got later in life, I realized I'm just very comfortable being vulnerable. I am what I am. Like I'm not, it's kind of one of those things like, this is who I am. This is what you get. And I've never had a problem with that. But it's not sometimes, I think, a safe place for many men to go, but it's an interesting thing we can talk about. Before we get deeper down that road, just getting back to kind of being a healer and a teacher, people that are tuning in, listening, for someone who's, say, coming out of they're getting a psychology degree, and you were at Cape Cod, is that correct? Not Cape Cod.
Cape Town.
Cape Town, my bad.
South Africa.
South Africa. Yeah. And then I believe you got some additional schooling after that. If you could take yourself back to that age, that mindset, what is what is some advice you can give? I mean, because you have a niche, you have a specialty, somebody that's coming out that's interested in psychology, being a teacher, being a healer. Is there anything that you can think of that might hit home with them as far as advice on choosing your line of work or getting into something similar to what you do?
Yeah. You know what? The first thought that comes to mind is there might not be a straight line to getting to where you want to go. You have to expect that whatever you're doing right now may be a stepping stone to the next stepping stone, to the next stepping stone, which is going to carry you closer and closer towards the thing that you really want to be doing. And I can really only speak from my experience, which started when I was 14 years old. I read the autobiography of Carl Jung, and in it, he said somewhere that we cannot effect true healing until we reach the soul. So that lit something up in me. There was an inspiration that happened when I was 14 years old. And the question arose in me, how do we do that? How do we reach the soul? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What difference does it really make? And how do I explain all of that to my nuclear physicist father? So already there was this intuition, this inspiration that came up with a knowing that I wanted to be able to teach. But I don't think I could have even articulated that at the time. I just knew that, oh my gosh, here was Carl Jung, and he was a psychiatrist. I didn't get into medical school, not that I tried. So the next best thing for me was to go and get a degree in psychology. Now I knew by the end of that degree, I didn't want to be a therapist, not a psychologist, not the way we were being trained. So I also got a diploma in film production. And my thinking was, well, then I'll go to London and I'll join the BBC, and I'll have the BBC teach me how to make beautiful movies so that I can save the world by reconnecting people to their souls. Well, I went to London and I spent 3 months trying to get into the BBC until somebody finally said, who the hell are you? And what experience do you have? And don't you know you're supposed to be part of the union? At which point I said, to heck with it. The world is going to have to figure out how to save itself. Because what I'd rather do right now is get on a boat and sail to the Caribbean and swim with dolphins. So I did. So I would follow these desires of mine, and I ended up on a boat sailing to the Caribbean where I swam with dolphins. But along the way, I met healers of different kinds. I either had something go wrong with me in a certain island where the only person who could help was a massage therapist from California, or a chiropractor from somewhere else, or a local indigenous healer. And so I watched myself be guided into experiences that all revolved around this question of, what does it mean to heal? How do we reach the soul? This inspiration that happened when I was 14. And then from there, my now ex-husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, got hit by a car in Antigua. And so the only person who could help him then was a massage therapist or chiropractor from somewhere. And she showed me how to work with my hands, which led me into massage therapy, neuromuscular therapy. But all the time, there was still this question of, how do we reach the soul? What does it mean to heal? Like, I want to be able to effect true healing. But I went deeply into massage therapy, years and years and years of being a somatic therapist, which led me into kinesiology. And again, when somebody said, hey, there's this thing called behavioral kinesiology, I think you'd enjoy it, there was something that popped up in me that said, yes, do it. And again, I went fully into that, became the apprentice of the teacher, traveled with her until that little niggle came of, yeah, but it's still not fully answering the question. And the next thing popped up, which was the DiMartini method. And I've been in that world for 20 years because finally that answered the questions that I had been seeking to answer. So for me, it was, I went into the field. I knew I didn't want to be a therapist, but I still got my degree. And then I followed the next intuition, which took me into a bit of film production, which ended up taking me into sailing, which ended up taking me into somatic therapy, into kinesiology, finally into the DiMartini method. And I built a whole first half of my professional life around following those intuitions. Now, then I got to a point of, oh my gosh, I'm in my 40s now and all my questions have been answered and I don't know what I'm striving for anymore. And while I've been so focused on following the intuition or the little guidance of my inner voice, I wasn't really focused on actually building businesses and saving money. So, oh my gosh, now, in midlife, suddenly things that had been inspiring to me in the beginning were no longer as inspiring. The questions that had been driving me weren't driving me anymore because I had the answers. And so I started to beat myself up, judging myself through the lens of a new and emerging value system, right? Which sent me into a big spiral of identity crisis in which there was a lot of self-flagellation and what the heck have I been doing? And I've really messed up and I should have been doing other things. And what was I thinking? And so on and so forth, which was its own journey to navigate. And thankfully, I'm on the other side of that. But if I look back at my younger self, there are a couple of things. I don't know that I would change anything, to be perfectly honest. I had a really high value on listening to my intuition and being guided by my inner voice. And when I got to the point of thinking I'd made mistakes and beating myself up, I learned a lot more about where self-flagellation comes from. And I learned to reframe my experience in a way that I could maintain a sense of gratitude towards me for being who I was all the way through. And if Joseph Campbell's right, the adventure of a lifetime is to be yourself when everybody else is expecting you to be something different, I would add the adventure of a lifetime is to be yourself when you yourself are expecting yourself to be something different. Can you love yourself for who you actually are? Now, I feel like I'm rambling past the topic of the question that you asked about what advice would you give. I think the advice would be follow your intuition and know that it's okay to change, to jump to another stepping stone when a new stepping stone that is really speaking to you emerges. Does that help?
It's great. I love it. Everything you're saying. So don't ever apologize. By the way, I really love Joseph Campbell too. The hero's journey is something I think about a lot. And sometimes I feel like I'm going on it myself. And a lot of his words really resonate. A couple things I want to get into, and we don't have to get into in this order, but just the addicted to the identity and that whole concept, which, I think I battled with myself. And maybe we can get into that because I think, at a 26, 27, 25-year-old, maybe they're not thinking like this. So maybe we can try to articulate, people are coming out of school. They have an identity of themselves, a lens to which they think success is. And then they may choose a career based on that perception or that belief system. And if you understand the addictedness to an identity that might not really be your true identity. I mean, there's something there that I want to get into. The other one is the DiMartini, the modality that you've been very committed to. I'd like to get into a little more about what that is and how you use that. And then I also just want to make a comment about, listening to your story and your intuition and your braveness. I feel like that's a gift that you had at a young age, an awareness that maybe not a lot of people would have the strength to follow their heart and their intuition. And I guess I just maybe want to ask, you did it. I think you were unique. Is there something that you can say to somebody that might feel like, gosh, she's brave. I could never do what she's doing. My world would fall apart. My parents would disown me. I'll be on the streets in 3 years. Like, is there something, because I think there's probably people listening that can't truly relate. There are some that can, but I think what you've done is, a perfect example of being true to who you are. And I love to see more people fall in line. So is there something maybe you could say to someone that might be challenging that way of living, or maybe doubtful that they could do that?
Sure. It's funny to hear you describe me as brave when so much of me sees me as a scaredy cat. So the question is, if there's something you want to do, how do you give yourself permission to do it even when it feels really scary? And when you're afraid you're going to disappoint the people around you? Yeah.
And let me just give you like, mom wants me to be a doctor. My dad wants me to be an attorney. All my friends are moving to New York after grad school to go work on Wall Street. I hate finances. I don't want to be a doctor. There's too many lawyers. I just want to go write film scores for movies, or, I want to go paint and be a painter in Africa. And like one of my guests is a world famous oil painter of African wildlife. Like, what is that kind of stuff? Like, like those voices in your head, how, if you had that person in front of you, what would your advice be?
Find a support system who will encourage you to do that. At least one person. If I look at the adventures that I have, sailing across the oceans several times and hitchhiking up the coast of South Africa and sleeping on beaches and being chased by a warthog and what have you in the African savannah, I would never have done those things if I was just by myself. And I don't know if this is just female or male, I don't know, but I can only speak for myself, right? When I really looked at what made it possible for me to do the things that I did, what I saw was that I was generally in relationship with somebody who was braver than I was. And I got brave because of their bravery, right? So find someone who will support you. One person who will hold space for you to be brave and support you in that, whether it's a coach, a mentor, another family member, a friend, somebody that you admire. Reach out to that person and ask them how they did it. Learn from, as John DeMartini likes to say, stand on the shoulders of giants. Learn from the people who are doing things that are similar to what you want to do. I just did it through my relationships, my boyfriends.
It's great advice. How about modality wise? Like, you referenced DeMartini. Tell us a little bit. Getting back more into people that are wanting to be a healer, a teacher, a life coach, whatever the verbiage is. Like, I want to get more into kind of what that day, that weekend, that Monday morning looks like, in terms of, what are you, a piece of pie, and is 80% of your time doing Zoom calls? What does that look like to do what you do? But also I want to get into the modality that you seem to be really attached to.
So, it's evolved over the years, obviously. The majority of my clients are one-on-one. And if I look back over the last 20 years of what I've been doing, I've typically done one-on-one, that's been consistent. And then throughout time, I've gone in and out of running multi-day workshops and retreats. So I would say 50% of what I do is actually working with clients. Now I'm talking as a solopreneur. Maybe 50% of what I do is working with clients, and the other 50% is everything else. The billing, the marketing, the setting up, the logistics of setting up events and so on. So because I'm a solopreneur and because I really value the freedom to spend time back in South Africa or wherever I want to be, and I value the freedom of being able to work from wherever I am, I don't want a big business. I've never wanted to be responsible for a lot of people on my payroll or anything like that. So I guess an important part of this is just knowing yourself and knowing where you're comfortable in life. And so for me, it's been very comfortable and satisfying to have a relatively manageable small business in which I can spend half my time working with clients in the way that I want to. But the cost of that is having to do the other stuff, which I don't necessarily love, but it's what I have to do in order to do the bits that I do love. So maybe there's a piece here where we can combine some of the modality that I use with the actual, what does my day or my life look like? And one of the principles of this modality is that there's never pain without pleasure, right? And there's never pleasure without pain, and they come as a bundle. They're two sides of the same coin. So striving for positive without negative, or gain without pain, gain without loss, profit without loss, is the source of a lot of suffering in people, right? There are things out there. If you're struggling, then you're not in your bliss and you're not on your path, et cetera, et cetera. No, boy, all the pleasure you experience, you're going to experience pain. The question is, as we become more integrated and understand these principles, the questions that we can be asking are, what forms of pain and pleasure would we most prefer to experience? And when we look through that lens, when I look at myself through this lens, so I have the pain, if you like, of a relatively small business, but I have the pleasure of the freedom to work from wherever. And for me, that's I could put in a lot more work. I could hire people to build the business. To me, there would be the pleasure of both serving more clients and making more money, but also the pain of I'm serving more clients and I'm having to manage more people. And that in my current value system has not been where I've wanted to play. So there's the principle in there is, stop striving for a fantasy where it's going to be all good and no bad, all pleasure and no pain. Know that there's going to be both sides. Ask intelligent questions to help illuminate both sides of all the different choices you could make, and then choose the pairing of pain and pleasure that you think is most likely going to drive you in the direction of your highest priorities, and do that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. So a question came up. So let's just say you met somebody that was really good on the P&L and the business stuff. That to me feels like all pleasure for you. If you were to offload that, and it feels realistic. So, but yet you're saying that you have to have both in the real world. But I'm wondering, I guess I'm not doubting what you're saying, but it feels like you could actually have more pleasure and less pain if you had somebody that could handle all those logistics, run the P&L. Maybe a comment or two on that.
Yeah. What are the pains that what are the costs or the downsides of having somebody do that? Would be, so what's the downside of making more money? You pay more taxes, you're more responsible to more people, you increase your lifestyle, do you really save more? It depends on your value systems. I understand that the vision that if I hired somebody to do the stuff I don't like to do, I can do more of the stuff that I do like to do. And yes, that's true, but not without also experiencing more challenge. So as long as I'm aware of that, then I might look at, so yes, I hire someone to do the business side of things and the things that I don't necessarily love doing, the marketing and so on and so forth. Great. So they get me more business. I get to do more of what I like to do in business. But at what cost to the freedom I have right now to go for a hike with my girlfriend at 3:30 in the afternoon, or go home to South Africa for 6 weeks, or, go do things with Doug when he feels like doing things. There's always going to be a cost to everything, and that's universal principles. There's pain and pleasure no matter what we do. The more clear we are on who we are, what our highest values are, and we'll have to talk about what values really are, but the clearer we are on what our authentic values are, the more we can make decisions about, if I choose to hire a business person, I'll get all of these benefits, but at this cost, these negatives. And if I don't choose to hire a business person, then I have all of these benefits, but all of these costs. Which one of those pairings is going to really move me in the direction of what is highest on my values hierarchy? Then I can choose to go either way. And the big thing in that sentence is I have choice.
Yeah. Let's get into the values for sure. I hear you. I might butcher this, so maybe you can help me reframe it in a better way. But so if somebody's listening, I think what I'm hearing in a simplified version is, suffering might be based off an assumption that this job is going to be all pleasure, and but with good things come hard work, maybe some negative, there's good and bad. So maybe more of a realistic outlook or idea, in terms of maybe, I don't want to say lowering the bar, but just being more realistic about what you're getting into. And I think a lot of times with social media or whatever, people have these visions of, like on reality TV shows about being a realtor. I had a luxury agent on a few weeks ago who's one of the top in the country. And she was just laughing like, that's so not our job. There's, I have to clean toilets and I have to do all these little things you never see. So maybe more of a reality check. But I know that's a very simplified version, but I think a lot of people are coming out of school. Like, I wanted to go right to the top. I wanted to expedite my success. I didn't want to sell long distance for AT&T. I didn't want to, do all these menial tasks. I just wanted to kind of be that young guy that, jumped to the front of the line. And I know that's not realistic or healthy. So I had a hard time. I really struggled because the negative stuff I wasn't prepared for. I thought I could bypass it. Again, I'm rambling. I don't want to keep talking about me, but the value, I want you to talk a little more about that. We were discussing that prior to hitting record. And I think that's crucial to people understanding and thinking about their life work.
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, I don't know how anybody does anything without a good understanding of value systems. So what I mean by value systems is not what is generally espoused when it comes to talking about values. So what's generally espoused is the idea that values are things like freedom, honesty, integrity, generosity, et cetera, right? Those are not values, in my opinion. Those are human traits. We all have the traits of generosity and honesty and integrity and all of those things. And I don't think there's any person in the world who would say they don't value freedom. They value being entrapped or imprisoned. So that kind of thinking about values to me doesn't tell us anything about human behavior. Like, values from an axiological point of view should predict behavior. So what's more interesting is if you say, well, I have a high value on freedom, the question that comes up for me is freedom to do what? Freedom to swim in the ocean and surf every day, freedom to make money, freedom to have children, freedom to ride a bike across the world, around the world, to sail a boat, freedom to what? To write literature, to watch pornography, what? Let's get real about what are you actually talking about? So to me, values are the things and experiences that you value enough to dedicate space, time, energy, and money towards. So there are things and experiences that your life demonstrates are actually priorities to you because you consistently dedicate your space, your time, your energy, and your money to them. So most of us don't know what our authentic values are. So we have injected values and we have authentic values. And the injected values are the values that we take in or that are injected into us by our parents, our peer group, our teachers, the authority figures in our society, our culture, etc. So we all grow up with these injected beliefs about what we're supposed to value, what we're supposed to prioritize, what is supposed to be important to us. And then we have our authentic value systems, our actual value systems, which will be evidenced or demonstrated by what we consistently do with our space, our time, our energy, and our money. And this gap between the injected value system and the authentic value system is where stress lives, right? So what we'll find is we'll start out trying to do the things that we've been told are important to us. But our inner wisdom will only let us go so far down that road, and then it'll pull us back to our authentic value system, right? When we don't understand that it's actually our internal wisdom that is trying to guide us back to our authentic value system, this going off on a tangent and then coming back gets called self-sabotage. There is no such thing as self-sabotage. There is self-correction. And the correction is from going too far down a path that we've been told we should go down, the value system that we're supposed to live by, to coming back to what is authentically valuable to us. So one way to figure out what's valuable to you could also be to look at where do you supposedly self-sabotage? Like, what were you doing and what did you go veer towards doing that felt more meaningful to you? That's information on, okay, that's an expression of your value system. So, you know, in an ideal world, teachers would be trained to think about, look at their children in this way. Parents would be trained to look at their children in this way. And children may be encouraged to actually develop and pursue the things that are in alignment with their authentic value systems. But unfortunately, we don't live in that world. We live in a world where there is a value system of society, and it gets very forcefully enforced on children. And we're trained to become, to follow the herd and do what is expected of us. So I feel like there was a question that you asked, and I've sort of lost the trail of it as I was talking about value systems. What was your question for me? I know there was a reason for where we were going with this.
Well, no, I mean, we're talking the whole value and how that might help somebody if they go through this exercise. I love what you're talking about, because I think that gap for me personally has caused a lot of stress in my life. And then, going back to authentic is I've never really looked at it through a lens of self-correctness. I've looked at it as self-sabotage, or like I was a very big producer in my industry, and it got kind of lonely. And then in a small pond, I mean, but I was the top guy, and I didn't like being the top. Like, I was nobody around me to, get better from. And I remember joining this coaching group where I met Doug. And then all of a sudden I was around these really big time, and I liked it way better because I was actually growing and learning. But I guess the stress though of like getting tired of running a race that, you don't necessarily want to win. And I kept coming back to things like coaching, personal coaching my kids' sports, farming my property. And I always felt conflict with it, but I also felt like it was part of my identity. So I feel like I can really relate. And I think that people, whether they're in their 20s or 30s or 40s, I think that's the beauty of trying to, you talked a little bit about the lens you're looking at, whether it's the lens of the new direction or maybe your previous life or the mindset you had as a 25. And I hope I'm not rambling too much, but
the values that drive you in the first half of life compared to the values that drive you in the second half of life.
Yeah. And I think I'd like maybe you could elaborate a little bit about maybe not being so hard on yourself about how you lived your first 25 years of your life, but maybe looking at it through a lens of you did what you had to do. And now you unwire, certain belief systems and peel back the layers. So, like just being the whole self-sabotage thing, I think it gets in the way of a lot of success and joy, especially with careers.
Yeah, it does. And it's maybe not the self-sabotaging, but the story that we tell around it, right? So self-sabotage equals I failed, equals I'm not good enough, equals I feel bad about myself. Now I'm in shame, right? And shame is the hardest emotion for us to feel. The second we feel shame, I mean, we're right back in the amygdala, and where we most likely want to go is into blame. Right? When we start feeling ashamed of ourselves, and guilt and shame are two different things. Guilt arises when we think we've done something bad to somebody else, which is relatively easy to deal with. You can go make amends. Shame is the feeling that you are something bad, like you are a screw up, you are a failure. Like, what do you do with that? It's so painful for the psyche to feel that almost always what we do is project that out and blame someone or something else for the way that we feel, right? Psychotherapy is a great one for that. Blame it on your parents, right? But it arises from a false narrative, in my opinion. It arises from a narrative that says, I should have kept doing that. I should have kept being that person, and now I didn't. I stopped. I self-sabotaged. I screwed up. I failed. That is a false narrative. You went as far as you could with that value system. And here's the thing. Did I already say this? I can't remember if this was before we were talking or in this. Our value systems, our values are driven by our voids. So the bigger the void and the more pain you feel with that void, the higher the value becomes for you to fill that void, right? So if your void is money, let's say, if you feel like you don't have enough money and there's pain associated in your mind with not having more money than you have, you're going to place a high value on going to make money. And at some point, you're going to get to a point where the void of money has been filled. And so continuing to do the things that make you money, what's the point, right? You don't have the void that's driving the value anymore, right? As soon as we fill a void, our value system will change. We never have to worry about running out of values or running out of voids. The next void will always appear, right? Because the universe abhors a vacuum. The next void will appear, and we'll start reorienting our lives to figure out how to fill that void. Now, that requires something that feels like an identity change, right? So if you've spent the first 25 years of your career with the void was making money, and having a house and 3 cars and paying for kids' education or whatever you associate with the money, or like once those voids have been filled, like after 25 years of focusing on that as a high value, suddenly it doesn't feel as high value to you to keep doing the same kind of things. And so very often what happens is people go into, and this is midlife crisis, go into questioning, who am I? What is important? And then we go into self-flagellation. We start judging ourselves, our younger selves, through the lens of the value system that is emerging. Right?
Can you say that again?
Yeah. So we judge our younger selves through the value system the new value system that is emerging. Right? And so this new value system says, well, I should have valued spending time with my family. I should have, right? Because the new value system is, I want to spend time with my family. So, and we judge everything through our value systems. This is why I think value systems are so key. They form the lens through which we judge everything. So if the new value system is spending time with family, then you'll look back at your past self and think, you idiot, you did it wrong. You should have done it differently. You should have valued other things than making money, right? And you'll go into self-flagellation and beat yourself up. And all the wisdom in beating yourself up it's actually part of what it's there's innate wisdom in it, in that you're trying to break your addiction to being the person who valued making money. So when we're trying to break an addiction to anything, we have to demonize it. We have to see more negatives associated with it than positives. So it's actually an expression of your unconscious wisdom or your higher minded wisdom to go into self-flagellation, because you're attempting at an unconscious level to break your addiction. I think there's a smarter, faster way to do it, which is, I'm not going to go into the addiction protocol at all, but one of the things that I have found to be so helpful both to myself and the people that I work with that are struggling with this kind of identity crisis in midlife, when value systems are shifting and not quite clear what the new value system is, but you just feel shitty or like you've done something wrong in the first half of your career. What we have to do is go back and judge ourselves through the lens of the value system that was driving us back then. Right. So if the value system for those years had been build a career, put money in the bank, buy the house, secure the kids' education, then the question becomes, well, how well did you do at doing that? Right? How well did you do at making money or building the business or being a loyal employee or, reaching the goals that you set for yourself back then? And you're most likely going to see that there's a lot to say thank you to yourself for having been who you were. The more we can say thank you to ourselves for having been who we were, in other words, and this is, to me, it's a process of functional analysis. Like, what was the function of being that person? How did it serve you? What did you gain from it? What were the benefits and the gifts of being that person? Like, you're really, that is the practice of falling in love with yourself, of becoming graceful towards yourself. And when the more graceful we can be with ourselves, or grateful towards ourselves we can be, the more we keep our brain functioning from the executive center, the more we keep ourselves in a state of greater inspiration, rather than from this place back here in the amygdala where we're in shame and guilt and self-flagellation. I mean, there's no creativity in that, right? So what we have to learn to do in midlife, we have to understand value systems. We have to learn to judge ourselves through the lens of the past value system in order to get grateful. And we have to know how to watch for the signs of the emerging value system, and then honor ourselves enough to orient our lives towards that, towards the new value system that is calling us forward.
I love this. Okay, so I have to ask you this, because this is for somebody that's starting their career. My mind is going to, okay, then how do you create an authentic value system that's based off of the right stuff? And and maybe you don't know, like at 24, I didn't realize how important it was for me to have, wake up with my kids, go to bed with them, coach them in sports. I've never missed a birthday, never missed a holiday. I didn't think about that when I was coming out of school. Like, that to me is number one. And so part of me, I'm very grateful and I'm proud of myself for being such a good dad. And it's not like I'm doing this, but like, I really love being present. But a lot of kids and young adults are coming out of school with, just different voices in their head. This value system is so crucial. Mm-hmm. I wish I could go back and really get, firm on what that would be. What would be your advice to someone younger that, to try to create the right value system, the authentic value system, to launch them in the right direction?
Okay, let me play with some of those words, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
It's not about creating the right value system. It's about honoring your authentic value system as it exists. Okay. So we come into the world with value systems. Right? Babies have value systems. They have preferences and it goes, we can go back even further. I said our values arise from our voids. We can link that to the innate preference in our physiology for pleasure over pain. Right? So babies come in with preferences of what they think brings them pleasure and what they think brings them pain. So we all have value systems right from the get-go. It's about knowing how to honor our value systems. And unfortunately, let me say what I think the problems are, and then we can get to how do you address that. I think of a friend of mine whose kid, right from when he was little, was fascinated by cars, absolutely fascinated by cars. He could tell you the makes and models. He loved race cars. He could tell you the drivers and the top speeds and all of this stuff. But couldn't add two and two together, couldn't sit still in his seat at school. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people relate to this. And of course was diagnosed with ADD, right? So kids that are diagnosed with ADD, generally also attention deficit disorder, if you look at them, they will also have attention surplus in certain areas. So the thing to be looking at is, where do I have surplus attention? Like what do I get up and do that requires no external motivation, right? For this kid, it was cars, anything to do with cars, magazine. He would get up and read magazines or rush to the TV to watch races or whatever. For other kids, it's video games. Now, what does the world around us, those kids, usually do? That's wrong. You shouldn't spend so much of your time playing with cars or playing video games. You should do mathematics or something else, right? So but the message for parents, if you want to raise kids who are able to live in alignment with their value systems, is look at what the kids are naturally drawn to and support them in doing more of that. Mm-hmm. And then this goes back to a question you asked earlier. Learn to link the things that you don't like doing to the things that you do value. So, and I'm jumping around a little bit here. Parents need to learn to do this for themselves and then teach children to do this. You were talking about being a young 20-something-year-old and not wanting to do the grunt work. You wanted to just jump to the top, right? If you had been that 21-year-old and you had a system where you could sit down with a piece of paper and write out all the ways in which doing the grunt work was assisting you and moving you towards the thing that you really wanted to be doing, you would have struggled less. You would have suffered less with the grunt work because you would have seen it as being a stepping stone, something that was helpful, getting you going in the direction that you wanted to go. Right? If we can't make associations or links between the things that we're supposed to be doing, and we just, we're just constantly in a state of, oh God, I hate doing this. I don't want to do this. That's a very depressing way to be. Whereas if you've taken the time to actually write out a list of 25 ways in which this thing you don't want to do is actually helping you move in the direction of the thing you do really want to do next, then what arises is gratitude. Again, gratitude in you for this thing.
I love it. I'm just thinking, it's so spot on because all the things I was doing, I remember I was at a company, AT&T, and I met the bigwig, and someone introduced us and said, you have to meet Dirk. He's going to be somebody. Like, he's really moving. And in my mind, no, you don't want to meet me. I have no interest in being you. I don't want to go up the corporate ladder. I don't want to play the game. And I remember I feel like I'm an imposter. And so looking at all the grunt work, I didn't really want to get to where it was going to lead me, which was the problem, because I didn't have any, you know what I mean? So it's that's so crucial, because if I was in the right direction, that was in alignment with, and that's what, the genius zone is a lot of what you're talking about when you're in your flow, what lights you up. I think I would have thought of the grunt work differently. I just was running a race that I didn't want to win.
So how long did you stay in that race?
A long time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And at some point it got to the point where all the things that particular job were providing, the value that drove you to stay in that job, the voids had been filled, the voids had been filled, right?
Yeah.
And so it absolutely made no more sense to stay in that job. So you stepped onto the next stepping stone. If you could go back, what I would suggest is going back and looking at that job and all the things that you thought were negative, all the things that you could write on a piece of paper that were negative about that job, balance your perception, equilibrate your perception with all of the things that you gained from that job, including, the money, whatever that was, the people you met, the skills you developed, the doors that it opened for you, et cetera, I imagine that you would get to a place where you could actually see that there was wisdom in everything that you did.
Yeah, I think so much of it was the definition of success was my dad's. And I didn't realize it until later in my life that it wasn't mine. Like I worked for Mark Cuban, who, if you know who he was, and all of a sudden he sells it. We sold our company to Yahoo and he makes billions of dollars. And I just thought that was normal. And I'm like, okay, I need to make $1 billion someday like Mark. And I think I was just kind of in a world of it wasn't reality, it was just a really interesting time in our economy. But I want to ask you something about, do you think we're addicted to having voids?
Are we addicted to having voids? I think it's the nature of the game. We cannot not have voids.
Okay.
Right? I mean, all of this model is based on cosmology, right? If we dare go here, right? Like the sort of common thinking about the origin of the universe is that there was nothing and then there was a big bang. But there's a theory beyond that which says there was not nothing. There was a cosmic vacuum. And from the vacuum, everything emerged. And so everything was contained within the vacuum, and from the vacuum, everything emerged. Life only keeps going because of voids, right? Growth happens, or another way to say it is growth happens on the border of chaos and order. There has to be some chaos to propel life. It's part of our nature. We're always going to have voids. If we get to a point where we say, I am completely full. In fact, there was a professor in South Africa that the story was retold by my Afrikaans teacher when I was at high school. And she said that this man had said to her, "My emmertjie is nou vol," which meant his bucket was full. He died within a month, right? When our buckets are full, when there is no more question that is interesting to us, no more void of an answer to something that we're seeking, then we will cease to exist. So there will always be voids. There will always be voids. What we get addicted to is pleasure over pain.
I think we could keep going on and on. I know we're probably getting close to the finish line. And I'm fascinated. I mean, I think you could help me. I just think you have a lot of really interesting ways of thinking about things that I haven't thought of. As far as like just Jolina Karen is your website, right? And as far as taking on clients, I mean, are you taking on new clients or are you kind of maxed out right now?
No, I'm taking on clients. As I said, people sort of cycle in and out with me. So, there's pretty much always a void that I can fill.
Cool. I get it. Anything like you want to say, again, getting back to the gist of this podcast, as far as educating people on the life behind a career, and then just reinforcing, the importance of being in your flow and how that might translate to liking life more and having more joy and success. Is there anything that you want to leave the group or the audience with?
Yeah, I think coming back to me, the most important thing that we have to understand are value systems. We have to figure out what our authentic hierarchy of values actually is. And so that's the first piece, is know your values, know what your authentic values are. And again, not freedom, honesty, blah, blah, blah. That's not it. What are the things and experiences that are actually meaningful to you as evidenced by how you're living your life, how you're spending your space, time, energy, money? Get really clear on that. And then what follows that becomes the question of how do I do more of the things that are authentically meaningful to me? And what you're going to bump up into is conflict. You're going to bump into the fear of disappointing people around you, or letting yourself down, letting go of an image of yourself that you thought you were supposed to be working towards, etc. You're gonna bump into that. identity crisis is part of identity growth. It's like a snake shedding its skin. At some point, the snake gets too big, the skin has to go. As we get bigger and bigger and more clear on who we are, the skins of these identities that we've taken on, or personas that we've taken on, become too small and they have to go. So know that that's going to come up. It's, being self-aware does not make life easier. It makes us more responsible to actually being authentic to ourselves. So I would recommend first get clear on your value system. Know that as you orient your life towards living that, there are going to be some challenges, and seek out people who can support you through those challenges, whether it's a coach or a therapist, coach probably, or friends, mentors, people that you admire. Make those relationships, stand on the shoulders of giants. Let their wisdom inform you and carry you towards where you want to go. I think that's what I want to say.
Would you also say there's fear of success?
No, I think I think it's a misnomer. And what we really fear is not success, but we fear the pain that comes with success. So success sounds great, right? It's like, back to the conversation we had earlier of, if I brought on somebody to do the business side of things, then I could get to do all of the talking with clients and doing the things that I want to do. But that has its own set of challenges that come with it. As we grow a business, as an entrepreneur grows a business, they appear to be more and more successful, right? But they're also having to put more and more systems in place. They're having to manage people. They have more demands from more customers. There's no pleasure without pain. And some part of us already knows this. I mean, what I hear from people all the time is, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. Why isn't anybody else talking about this very much? And I get that response of, this makes so much sense, because somewhere inside us, we already know this. But we have been sold a fantasy that we're supposed to be able to have positive without negative, right? Gain without loss, right? We've been sold that fantasy. And the fantasy works as a creative agent, a creative stimulant. Like, we have to imagine that we're going to experience more pleasure than pain by doing something, or we wouldn't do it. So we have to have a fantasy to keep us moving to some degree. But the wisest people, I believe, if you look at if you read Stoic philosophy, the wisest business people, they all know that you never go into a business venture without listing out all of the costs. Like, what are the downsides? What's the pain going to be that I'm going to have to pay in order to realize the pleasure? So having this equilibrated mindset, recognizing that there is never a positive without a negative, and they come simultaneously, and then getting smart about identifying all the different sets of pains and pleasures and aligning them to your authentic value system. To me, that's the formula for success in anything: relationships, business, health.
Yeah, I keep wanting to cut it off because it's just gold, but I just keep asking. So where I was going on that, though, is when, like, being addicted to an identity, and an identity, let's just take a young man who's unhappy and blames his dad for a lot of his unhappiness in his career. That's maybe safer than not. Like, if you don't have that identity, then it's maybe scary to think about, who are you if you are successful and you forgive him and you don't use that as an excuse anymore. The idea of being successful might seem scarier, or because you don't have that attachment to an identity that maybe it hasn't served you, but it's been with you so many years in your life. I guess that's where I was going, is because I feel like safety is something we all crave, or at least I crave. And when I find myself changing, it's sometimes exciting, but it's also sometimes scary.
Exactly. So you got both going there. Tony Robbins talks about the 6 drivers, human drivers, I think. And the first one is safety, and the second one is novelty. So they're totally paradoxical. And we need both. which is chaos and order, right? We feel safe when we perceive order, and we want the excitement of the chaos of not really knowing exactly what's going to happen. And we need both, right? But we live in a society where we're a little more addicted to, well, to one side or the other, usually to the pleasure, whatever we perceive as pleasure. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We hold on to the stories that we're telling ourselves because they are the stories that make the most sense to us of our world. And to be unable to make sense of our world is very scary, right? It's confusing, and confusion registers in the brain as fear, right? And again, this is the thing about personal development work, like really, really being on a path of knowing yourself and living authentically. The scary part of that is that the thing that has to go is blame. We become 100% responsible to ourselves. Like, I am 100% responsible for every single story that I tell myself about what I'm experiencing. And sometimes I just want to bitch, and sometimes I just want to fall apart, and sometimes I just want to be the victim and have somebody put their arms around me and tell me, there, it's not your fault, it's some other idiot's fault, right? But there were moments when absolutely I just want that. And I give myself those moments, by the way, because I'm human, right? And I also know that is an arc of a story that I'm going through. And then maybe just give me a breather, or give me, some sort of connection, maybe with Doug, so I don't feel quite so alone in this world. But then I come back, like once I've got that void filled, and I no longer feel scared and alone, and I come back to, okay, what is this saying about me? What is the story that I just created telling me about my value systems, what parts of me I'm not loving, and where am I not honoring myself and living authentically with what's truly meaningful to me?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end this. So much there. And I mean, a lot of it goes right into what I'm trying to do in terms of create more joy in people's careers. And I think it starts with a lot of what we talked about. So Jolina, thank you so much for coming on. You were awesome, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I anything I can do to share this, I know how it's transformed my life in so many ways, and I'd love to share it more. So thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you.